Hey friends, today is the 31st of December 2022 and I'd like to share with you my top 7 favorite books that I read this year in different languages. This year I've read 73 books in total. Most of them, 38 books, were in Russian, 19 books were in English, 6 books were in Polish, also 5 in Spanish, 2 books were in Ukrainian, and 3 short books were in Armenian. I'll try to put a list of all 73 books I read this year in the description box down below. You can also find that list on my website, silentpolyglot.com, where I write about languages I'm learning and books I'm reading. And in this video, I'm going to be talking about the best of the best 7 books that I read this year, 2022, in English, Spanish, Polish, Ukrainian, Russian, and Armenian. And I'd like to start with the English book. It's called Armenia, Cradle of Civilization, written by David Marshall Lang. This was a great work, very well written and very well organized book that gives a lot of interesting information about Armenian history, Armenian culture. And, when I was reading this book, I felt that it was written with such love for this country, for Armenia, and for people who live there. So I highly recommend this book for anyone who is interested in Armenia and especially in Armenian history. I would also like to read something similar in the future, more books about Armenia, Georgia, Iran. So if you guys know any such book, please let me know in the comments down below. I would really love to hear all your books recommendations. The second book that I want to talk about was written in Spanish. This is also a non-fiction book. It's called Aprende, gramática y vocabulario 1, Learn Grammar and Vocabulary Book 1, written by Francisca Castro Viúdez y Pilar Díaz Ballesteros. This was a very good book of Spanish grammar with very short but very clear explanations. Explanations of many topics such as verbs, conjugations, use of prepositions, etc., etc. In fact, I can say that this was the first Spanish grammar book that I read from cover to cover. Also, I did all the exercises there, and I really like this book. There are actually 4 books in this Spanish grammar book series, Aprende, gramática y vocabulario. I've already read the first 2 books this year, and I'm looking forward to reading the other 2 books in the future. The next book, best book, was written in Ukrainian. This year I read 2 books in Ukrainian. One book was about horses, and the other one was a classical book. And although I am a big fan of horses, the classical book was the best. It's called Kайдашева, сім'я, Kaydash's family in English, written by a well-known Ukrainian writer, Iván Nečuy-Levicький. And this was an amazing book. It tells us quite sad but very realistic story about a large family who lived in the Ukrainian village in the 19th century. And all members of this large family have to live in the same territory. So we have here conflicts between family members, quarrels that just seem to appear out of thin air. Also violent fights, etc., etc. And the characters of this story are unbelievably real, as if you are standing there next to them at the very moment when all this happening. Also, we have here a beautifully written description of Ukrainian village, Ukrainian customs, traditions, such a unique glimpse of rural life in the 19th century. And I really liked reading about that and the people who had to be tough and strong to survive in such difficult circumstances. The next best book was written in Polish. This book, without any doubt, is one of the best sci-fi books I've ever read so far. It's called Wyjście, cienia, Out of the Shadows in English. The author is Janusz A. Zajdel. I heard that he is considered to be the second science fiction writer in popularity in Poland after the famous Stanisław Lem. But to me personally, he is the first. And of all his books that I've read so far, in my opinion, this one is the best. The main character here is a teenager. His name is Tim. He was born after a big war. In that war, people were fighting against bad aliens. When good aliens suddenly appeared and saved the Earth. So our Tim lives in a town. He goes to school. But suddenly he started to realize that the life around him is not as simple as it might be seen, as if it might seem at first sight. Many people have secrets, even in his own family. And the reality is pretty scary. And when we as readers look at the whole situation from the point of view of a child, of a teenager, I think the author's message is much stronger that way. So I would highly recommend this book to anyone who loves good sci-fi books of 1970s or 1980s, who loves social science fiction. I really highly recommend it. And now, Armenian language. This year, I read 3 books in Armenian. Of course, they were pretty small ones. And of course, I remember and liked the first book the most, partly because it was my the first book that I've read in Armenian, and also this very book taught me how to read in this beautiful language. It's an Armenian-Russian book called Armянские волшебные сказки, the Armenian Fairy Tales, adapted by Ilya Frank's reading method. It contains 11 beautiful stories by the great Armenian writer and poet Hovhannes Tumanyan. The book also includes an audio CD, and I had a great opportunity to read and listen to this story at the same time, many times in a row. And I don't know how to say it in English correctly, but I'd say thanks to this book, the Armenian letters on paper found a connection with these sounds in my head. So for all my friends who speak Russian and want to learn how to read in Armenian, I highly recommend that book. Just give it a try. And the next two books were written in Russian. It was actually hard for me to choose only two books today, because this year I took course in creative writing in my native language Russian, and for that course I had to read so many great works of Russian classical literature that choosing just a few of those books was a really difficult task. But I'll try anyway. And the first book I want to mention is Сожженная Москва, or in English translation it's Moscow Destroyed by Fire, written by Grigorий Данилевский. You know, I had never heard about this book before, but when one of my friends told me that I should read this book, I decided to find it and give it a try. And I'm glad I did it, because it was a really good book. Actually, this was the very first Russian book that I read in 2022 in January, and I immediately felt that that would be one of the best this year. The book was written in the 19th century and tells us a story about Napoleon's invasion of Russia in 1812. The author Grigorий Данилевский wrote about people who fight against the invasion, and he wrote so good, his characters so full of life, so real. Every minute I read, I emphasized with them as they struggled to survive. So if you are interested in Russian history and in good Russian literature, just read this book. I highly recommend it. And now, my absolute favorite of the year 2022. It's Тихий Дон by Михаил Шолохов. In English translation, it's called And Quietly Flowers the Dawn. As you can see, it's quite a big novel in 4 volumes. It tells us a story about Don Cossacks families living near the Don River at the beginning of 20th century, and what those Don Cossack families had to go through during the First World War, Russian Revolution of 1917, also a Russian Civil War. That's a great book about life and hate, hope and loss, life and death. Very sad, but also very honest. The book that is also beautifully written. the writing style of the author of Michael Шолохов, his choice of words, his unique ability to find the exactly right word is just amazing, guys. I think it's one of the best novels I've ever read in my life. The book that I will never forget. Book that I will definitely go back and reread from time to time. So, those were my top 7 favorite books that I read in 2022 in different languages. Please let me know in the comments down below what were your favorite books of this year. I would really love to hear all your thoughts and book recommendations, because I'm always looking for interesting books to read in English, Spanish, Polish, Ukrainian, Russian, Belarusian, and now Armenian. Thank you so much for watching. I wish you all peace, happiness, and love. Happy New Year and happy reading. Bye!